My name is Marcia Matwis, I'm 45 years old, and I'm from Belo Horizonte, but I was living in Recife when something happened that changed my life forever. I'll reveal everything, but I need to tell you from the beginning so you understand the magnitude of what I witnessed. Do you believe in life after death? What if I told you I discovered the answer the hard way? I died for 36 hours, it's not an exaggeration to get attention. My heart stopped beating, my organs went into total failure. The doctors signed my death certificate at 4:35 a.m., on March 17, 2023, and during those 36 hours that I was clinically dead, I saw hell with my own eyes. I saw tortures that surpassed any horror film ever made. I saw Brazilian religious leaders in indescribable torment. I saw demons in their true, abominable forms, and most terrifying of all, I was almost trapped forever in a cell already prepared with my name, already customized to maximize my eternal suffering, based on every specific sin I committed in life. I need to go back in time a little so you can understand who I was and why I went through this experience. I'm a cardiologist graduated from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, with a residency at the Heart Institute in São Paulo and specialized in cardiac surgery in the United States. I have an extremely rational and skeptical mind. I was considered one of the best cardiac surgeons in the Northeast, having performed over 3,000 surgeries, including complex transplants and experimental procedures. But I wasn't just a skeptical doctor, I was an aggressive, militant atheist, a true evangelist of scientific materialism. Ever since medical school, when I had my first encounter with cadavers in anatomy class, I decided that souls didn't exist. To me, we were just complex biological machines. The brain produced consciousness, just as the liver produced bile, a simple product of biochemical reactions. At 30, I founded a group called Medicine Without Mysticism, which opposed any form of spirituality in the hospital environment. I prohibited chaplains from visiting my patients before surgeries. I ridiculed nurses who mentioned God during procedures. I removed religious symbols from the rooms under my supervision. I wrote scientific articles demonstrating that prayers had no statistical effect on the recovery of heart patients. My academic record was impeccable, a full professor of cardiology, a researcher with over 100 publications in international journals, and a sought-after speaker at world conferences. I used this prestige to promote what I called the disenchantment of medicine, the elimination of any trace of spirituality from medical practice. I had a blog with over 200,000 followers called Scalpel of Reason, where I dissected religious beliefs with the same precision with which I opened chests. I participated in debates against priests, pastors, and spiritualists, always armed with statistics, neurological studies, and materialistic philosophical arguments. For every religious miracle, I offered a scientific explanation. For each near-death experience, I presented studies on hallucinations caused by cerebral hypoxia. I lived a life completely focused on professional prestige and the material pleasures. I lived in a 600 square meter penthouse apartment on the Boa Viagem seafront. I drove a Porsche Cayenne, collected Swiss watches and contemporary art. My social calendar was filled with dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, international trips to medical conferences, always extended to luxury tourism, and superficial relationships with generally younger women, models, executives, and other doctors. I treated the human body as a machine and life as a brief interval of consciousness between non-being and non-being. For me, death was simply the end of all biological processes, the complete cessation of existence. Ironically, I spent my life fighting it in the operating room, but I believed that when I finally won, there would be absolutely nothing else. My behavior in the hospital was notoriously arrogant. I treated him with disdain during consultations. You can believe whatever you want, but it's my hands, not your prayers, that will save your heart. It was a phrase I repeated often. During surgeries, I wouldn't tolerate the team mentioning God or any religious expression. In my surgical center, there's only room for science, not for superstition, I said. I had a permanent team that submitted to my demands because I was technically brilliant. My surgical success rates were exceptional, which further fueled my ego and my belief that human skill, not divine intervention, was what truly saved lives. There was a nurse on my team, Raquel, who was a devout Christian, graduated with honors, and a specialist in cardiac intensive care, a highly competent professional who could work in any hospital in the country. But, for some incomprehensible reason, she chose to remain on my team. Despite my constant mockery of her faith, she would discreetly pray for patients before surgeries, wear a small crucifix hidden under her scrubs, and sometimes leave Bible verses on post-it notes in the break room. I made a point of tearing up these notes in front of her, mocking her prayers, challenging her faith with stories of children with congenital heart disease or good patients who died while criminals survived massive heart attacks. If your God exists, Raquel, he's either incompetent or cruel. In either case, he doesn't deserve worship. I provoked her. She never retaliated with anger, just smiled sadly and said, "One day you'll understand. Drive, Marcio." I'm praying for that. That day arrived unexpectedly and devastatingly. In March 2023, I was at the height of my career. I had just returned from a conference in Vienna, where I presented a new minimally invasive coronary artery bypass grafting technique I had developed. The international medical community applauded my work. I returned to Recife feeling invincible, a demigod in a white coat. In the early hours of March 15, I was awakened by a call from the hospital. A prominent local politician, president of the Pernambuco State Legislative Assembly, had suffered a massive heart attack and needed emergency surgery. Only I could perform the procedure with a chance of success. The case required, I drove to the emergency hospital, typical of the March Recife. As I traveled along Boavajam Avenue at over 100 km/h, I thought about how my prestige would increase after saving yet another prominent figure. I had already operated on businessmen, famous artists, and other politicians. Each success story was a trophy in my collection of medical achievements. Upon arriving at the hospital, I immediately went to the operating room, where the team was already preparing the patient. That's when I noticed something strange for the first time, a dark shadow hovering over the unconscious politician. I rubbed my eyes, attributing the vision to fatigue from the recent trip and the abrupt awakening. The surgery began. It was a complex case, extensive anterolateral infarction with papillary muscle rupture, requiring multiple revascularization and mitral valve repair, the kind of technical challenge I relished. As I worked, I noticed that shadow again, now more defined, floating around the operating table. It looked like a humanoid silhouette, but distorted, elongated, with overly thin limbs and excessively long fingers. "Is anyone else seeing this?" I asked, without taking my eyes off the operating field. "Seeing what, doctor?" The anesthesiologist replied, "That shadow must be a lighting problem. Adjust the lights." The surgery continued for 7 grueling hours. I managed to repair the damage, but the patient's heart was reluctant to resume beating autonomously. That's when I realized the shadow had become denser, more present. Now I could make out eyes, 2 luminescent greenish-yellow dots that watched me with malevolent intelligence. The creature seemed to be waiting for something. We struggled for another 2 hours to stabilize the patient. The entire arsenal of modern medicine was employed: vasoactive drugs, defibrillation, direct cardiac massage. Nothing worked lastingly. In a moment of frustration, I looked directly at the shadowy creature and swore I saw a smile form on that indistinct face. That's when the heart monitor emitted the continuous tone everyone dreads: complete systolysis. The patient had died. Time of death, 12:03. The anesthesiologist announced, and then I witnessed something that shattered all my materialistic certainties. I saw a translucent substance like pearly smoke slowly emerge from the politician's body. It was a vaguely human form that seemed confused, looking around disoriented. The shadowy creature immediately grabbed this luminous essence with its elongated claws and began dragging it down across the operating room floor. The most terrifying thing was that no one else seemed to see what was happening. The team continued with the finalization protocols, covering the body, preparing the documentation. I was paralyzed, staring at a phenomenon that my science said was impossible. "Doctor, is everything okay?" Raquel asked, touching my arm. "We did everything we could." I shook my head, unable to explain what I had witnessed. "Just tired," I replied automatically. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Rationalizing it was impossible. I was well rested after returning from that surgery. No, I had consumed alcohol or medication and had no history of psychiatric problems. As a doctor, I sought neurological explanations, hypnagogic hallucinations, brief psychotic episodes, a brain tumor pressing on the occipital lobe. I even secretly performed tests on myself, MRI, electroencephalogram, complete toxicology, all that normal. Science had no answers for what I witnessed, and then it began. I began seeing these shadowy creatures regularly in the hospital, especially in the ICU and emergency room. They hovered over terminally ill patients, sometimes simply observing, other times seeming to influence the course of the disease. In some rare cases, I also saw luminous beings emanating a kind of comforting golden light that seemed to protect certain patients. I became obsessed with understanding what was happening. I began researching similar accounts in the medical literature, in anthropological texts, in books on comparative religion. I found surprising patterns, with doctors, nurses, and caregivers around the world, across the centuries, reporting similar visions near the death of patients. My behavior at the hospital changed drastically. I would watch the most critically ill patients for hours, hoping to see the creatures. The staff began to notice. Comments about my mental state circulated. The head of the cardiology department called me in for a talk about stress and burnout. He recommended I take a vacation. I refused. I was obsessed with discovering the truth. I began working extra shifts in the emergency room and the ICU, where death was most frequent. I slept little, ate poorly, and lost weight. My reputation as a meticulous and focused surgeon was giving way to whispers of psychological instability. It was in this state of near obsession that in the early hours of March 17, 2023, I received an emergency call. A 67-year-old patient had suffered a massive heart attack and required immediate intervention. I was exhausted after 36 hours without sleep, but I insisted on performing the procedure. During the surgery, I began to see the shadowy creatures in numbers never before seen, not just one or two, but dozens of them circling the room, watching, waiting. I tried to stay focused on the procedure, but it was clear that my concentration wasn't the same. I made technical errors that would normally be unthinkable for a surgeon of my caliber. "Doctor, your vital signs are altered," the anesthesiologist warned, noticing my rapid heartbeat and profuse sweating. "I'm fine," I replied curtly, trying to ignore the shadows that now seemed to be watching me directly, not just the patient. That's when I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if a red-hot dagger were piercing my sternum. The scalpel fell from my hand. I clutched my chest and fell to my knees. Code blue. "Doctor in collapse!" someone shouted. The roles abruptly reversed. From surgeon, I became patient. My own team was now trying to revive me as I suffered a massive heart attack. The only thing I saw before I lost consciousness was one of the shadowy creatures hovering over me, those greenish-yellow eyes fixed on mine, a macabre smile revealing teeth too sharp to be human. What happened next defies everything medical science can explain. I found myself floating above the chaotic scene. I saw my body being defibrillated, my chest compressed with cardiac massage, tubes being inserted, medications being injected. The team worked frantically, Raquel coordinating the actions with surprising competence, taking over in my absence. There was no confusion or blurriness. I saw everything clearly, crystal clear. I could read the monitors from a distance, hear whispered conversations, perceive details that would be impossible even to normal eyes. It was as if all my senses were exponentially heightened. "He's not responding," continued the pressure. "Give him another vial of adrenaline. It's been 40 minutes, how much longer will we keep going?" Raquel was in tears, but continued chest compressions. "Don't give up on him, please, don't give up." I saw my colleagues exchanging looks of resignation. They knew the protocols as well as I did. After 45 minutes without a response, the chances of adequate neurological recovery were practically nil. Time of death, 4:35, announced the team leader, the same anesthesiologist who was with me during the politician's surgery. That's when I felt a presence beside me. One of the shadowy creatures hovered near me, no longer just watching, but now extending its claws toward me. Instinctively, I tried to back away, but something began to pull me, not upward, as so many near-death experiences report, but downward, with inescapable force. I crossed the operating room floor, then the lower floors of the hospital, finally the basement and the earth itself. I was pulled through a tunnel of suffocating darkness that seemed to swallow not only light, but hope, memory, identity. I tried to scream, but I no longer had a physical mouth. I tried to resist, but I no longer had a body to fight. After what seemed like an eternity of falling into that darkness, I reached a place I can only describe as the epicenter of horror. It was a vast cavernous space, lit by a fire that burned without consuming, producing more shadows than light. The air, if it can be called that, was thick with the smell of putrefaction, sulfur, and something more base and terrible, the odor of pure despair. This place violated every law of physics I knew. Impossible distances compressed into finite spaces, time seemed to flow non-linearly, with moments of agony stretching indefinitely, while intervals of lesser torment passed in moments. Logic itself seemed distorted, contradictory things existed simultaneously, impossibilities became real, sanity was systematically shattered. Soon I was surrounded by creatures similar to those I had seen in the hospital, but now in their full forms, no longer limited to partially visible shadows. They were abominable beings, some vaguely humanoid, others completely alien in form. They had skin that resembled burnt and rotting leather simultaneously, eyes that were wells of conscious malice, limbs in impossible numbers and configurations. Some had multiple heads that spoke in different languages simultaneously. Others possessed orifices that were not exactly mouths, but openings that sucked and expelled substances, indescribable. There were creatures that seemed made entirely of eyes, others that were composed of impossible geometries that caused pain just to behold. "Welcome, Dr. Marcia Matuus," said a voice that seemed to come from all directions simultaneously, the great cardiologist who discovered all the secrets of the human heart, except the most important. The creature that approached was larger than the others, with a presence that commanded attention and terror. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but distorted to impossible proportions. Its head was too large for its body, with twisted horns that seemed to constantly grow and retract. Its skin was black as obsidian, but covered in wounds that pulsed with red light, as if magma flowed beneath the surface. Its eyes were the same ones I had seen so many times in the hospital, greenish-yellow, with vertical, reptilian pupils. "You don't believe me, do you?" the creature continued. "I spent years by your side in the operating room. I saw every heart you opened, I saw every life you saved and everyone you let go. I realized then, with a growing horror gripped me, that this creature was somehow linked to death, perhaps even responsible for taking souls after death. As a doctor who constantly fought against death, I had inadvertently spent my career in direct confrontation with these entities, but now you are my doctor. Your science cannot save you here, your scalpel cannot cut what has no physical body, your medicine cannot heal what was never alive." I tried to speak, to argue, but I had no voice. I tried to run, but I had no body to move. I was completely at the mercy of these beings. "Come," the creature said, extending a hand with fingers too long, ending in sharp black claws. "Let me show you what we have in store for you." I was dragged through that hellish place, passing scenes of torment that defy description. I saw human souls in various states of punishment, each seemingly designed to reflect the sins committed in life. We then reached an area that the creature announced with pleasure. Obviously, the healers' quarters, fakes, those who played God. There I saw doctors, scientists, and researchers suffering specific torments. A surgeon was repeatedly operated on without anesthesia by demonic creatures, using rusty instruments, feeling in his own being all the pain he had caused or ignored in patients. A researcher who had falsified data for academic fame was forced to swallow pages of his fraudulent articles that turned to molten metal in his throat. "And here," said the demon, stopping before an empty cell, "is your special place." At the entrance was a plaque with my full name. Drive, Marcio Matus, a cardiologist, denied the existence of the soul as he watched them depart daily. The cell contained a surgical table, not of sterilized metal, but of some organic substance that pulsed as if alive. Around it were monitors showing every patient who died under my care, especially those to whom I denied spiritual comfort or mocked for their faith. "Here you will be eternally operated on, doctor. Your chest will be opened, your heart removed, examined, and replaced. You will feel all the pain, all the agony, without anesthesia, without pause, without end, and best of all, your surgeons will be the souls of those you treated merely as broken machines, not as spiritual beings." I saw surgical instruments laid out beside the table, grotesque and perverted versions of the tools that I used so precisely in life, rusty saws, tweezers with teeth too sharp forward, bent needles, sutures made of some material that seemed alive and dying. "And to ensure you never forget your arrogance," continued the demon, "with each cycle of torture, you will see the truth you denied, you will see the soul leaving each body, you will see the spiritual beings that exist beyond the material world, you will see everything you derided as primitive superstition." I was forced into the cell, pushed toward that grotesque table. The straps moved on their own, like living serpents binding me tightly. A surgical light above came on, but instead of brightness, it emanated a kind of concentrated darkness that, paradoxically, allowed me to see with terrible clarity. Shadowy forms began to materialize around the table, the spirits of those patients who died under my care, now transformed into executioners. I saw the politician with the heart attack, elderly people whose surgeries failed, children with congenital heart defects I couldn't save. The first of them took a cruel-looking scalpel and began to lower it toward my chest. That's when I heard a different voice, distant but clear, cutting through that horror. "Our Father who you are in heaven, hallowed be your name." The voice was familiar. It was Rachel praying beside my body in the hospital. Her prayer seemed to create waves of disturbance in that hellish reality, like stones thrown into a lake of darkness. "Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." The demonic creatures began to stir, uneasy. The main demon growled, "Silence, he belongs to us now. Give us this day our daily bread, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." With each word, a light began to penetrate that absolute darkness, small at first, like a distant star, but gradually growing. "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." "Enough," roared the demon, but it was clear that something greater was happening, something beyond its control. The light continued to grow until a figure materialized. I couldn't see its face, for it was like looking at the sun, but his mere presence caused the demons to recoil in utter terror. "He has not yet made his choice," said the luminous figure in a voice that was simultaneously thunder and a gentle breeze. "His time is not yet up." "He belongs to us," protested the chief demon. He had denied the truth all his life. He mocked the faithful, rejected the divine even when he saw it with his own eyes, and yet he answered to the light. A faithful servant prays for him, and by infinite mercy he will have one more chance. The luminous figure approached me. I could then make out a face of indescribable beauty, majestic and terrible, simultaneously. His eyes held absolute justice and infinite compassion. "Marcio," he said, "my name in your mouth sounded like music. You have lived denying my existence. But now you see the truth. What do you choose to do with this truth?" I tried to speak, but I still had no voice. Yet, somehow, he understood the cries of my spirit. "You wish to return, but fear it will only be to continue your old life. Allow me to show you what awaits you if you choose the path of light." Suddenly, I was transported away from that place of torment. I found myself floating above what seemed to be a realm of transcendent beauty. It wasn't a physical place as we understand it. It was more like a state of being where matter and spirit were not separated. colors that didn't exist in the visible spectrum, music that wasn't just sound vibrations, scents that carried complete meanings. I saw beings of pure light, moving in perfect harmony, human souls clothed in glorified bodies, free from pain, disease, or limitation. I realized that this was the true human destiny, not that place of torment, nor the annihilation I had presumed. This is the reality that your science cannot measure, that your scalpel cannot decipher, that your materialistic theories cannot explain, said the luminous figure. But it isn't something contrary to reason, it is reason planned, science transcended, not denied. I felt a profound understanding that the material universe I had studied so diligently was only the most superficial layer of reality, like the skin of a fruit hiding the nutritious pulp within. My entire academic life had been dedicated to studying the bark, denying the existence of the real fruit. Come back now, Marcio, the figure said, touching my chest exactly where I had felt the pain of the heart attack. Return and testify to what you saw. Heal not just bodies, but souls. Use your gift not just to extend temporal lives, but to prepare eternal beings. I felt myself being pulled back through that darkness, but now protected by a light the demons dared not challenge. I heard their roars of frustration as I escaped their clutches, and then, with a gasping, desperate sigh, my physical eyes opened. I was back in the hospital, lying in an ICU bed, tubes and wires connected to my body, heart monitors beeping regularly, Raquel's face stained with tears, but now lit with amazement and joy. Doctor, you're back, thank God. Other doctors and nurses rushed into the room, checking monitors, checking vital signs, expressing disbelief. I heard terms like spontaneous resuscitation, unexplained recovery, an unprecedented medical phenomenon. I tried to speak, but there was an endotracheal tube in my throat. I made signs to have him removed. After they verified that I was breathing adequately on my own, they reluctantly agreed. My first words, rasping through my irritated throat, were, "How long?" 36 hours, Raquel replied, holding my hand. "You were clinically dead for almost an hour. We declared death. Then, her body entered a state we couldn't explain. There was minimal brain activity, but no response to stimuli. The doctors wanted to declare brain death, but her family wouldn't authorize turning off the machines." I nodded, still trying to process everything. "I saw it," I started, but words seemed insufficient. "What, doctor? What did you see?" Raquel asked, her eyes full of expectation. I answered simply, "I saw everything I denied, the dark creatures in the hospital. Can you see them too?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes not everyone can. It's a gift or a burden, depending on how you look at it." In the days in the following weeks, while I was recovering physically, I tried to understand what had happened. I consulted neurologists, psychiatrists, and experts in near-death experiences. Some suggested hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, others spoke of the release of endogenous DMT at the moment of death. Still others proposed it was a psychological construct designed to cope with the trauma of near-death. But I knew the truth. What I experienced was more real than anything I had ever experienced, more vivid, clearer, more substantial than material reality itself. When I was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks, I was a transformed man. I sold my beachfront penthouse and donated my Porsche to a charity auction. I got rid of my collection of watches and artwork. I began to live more simply, more focused on the essentials. Most importantly, my medical practice has changed radically. I haven't abandoned science. I remain a technically excellent cardiologist, but now I see each patient as a whole being, body, mind, and soul. I allow chaplains in my department. I respect each patient's religious beliefs. I sometimes pray with patients before surgeries, if they wish. I can see it now. I see the dark creatures lurking around terminally ill patients, especially those who have lived in rebellion against the divine. I also see beings of light protecting others. I can often predict which patients are nearing their departure, not just by clinical signs, but by the heightened presence of these spiritual entities. I use this gift, not to frighten, but to prepare, to ensure patients have the opportunity to resolve outstanding issues, reconcile relationships, and, most importantly, make peace with God before passing. My reputation in the medical community has changed. Some colleagues consider me eccentric, others believe I suffered some kind of brain damage during the heart attack, but many patients seek me specifically, not just for my technical skill, but for the holistic approach I now offer. I founded an organization called Integral Medicine, which promotes the inclusion of spiritual care in conventional medical treatment. I give lectures about my experience, always emphasizing that I haven't abandoned science, only expanded its application to include dimensions I previously denied. Raquel remains on my team, now as a nursing coordinator. Our professional relationship is based on mutual respect. She never says, "I told you so," but sometimes we share a look of understanding when we both see the same spiritual entities in a patient's room. I still face challenges. The dark creatures seem to hold a special grudge against me since my return. I sense their malevolent presence occasionally, especially when I'm treating patients who could use spiritual redirection. It's as if they want to prevent me from doing the work I now recognize as my true calling. I often have vivid dreams where I revisit that place of torment. I wake up in a cold sweat, with a renewed certainty that I must use every moment of additional life I've been given to warn others about the reality that awaits us. 2 years have passed since my death experience. In that time, I have witnessed hundreds of patients make peaceful transitions, reconciled with the divine before their departure. I have also seen others who rejected any spiritual consideration until the very end, and I have watched with sadness the shadowy creatures, anxiously awaiting them. I cannot scientifically prove what I saw. I cannot place a demon under a microscope or measure the spectral composition of an angelic's being, but I know what I experienced, and it has completely transformed my understanding of reality, medicine, and my purpose as a physician. If you are a healthcare professional reading this account, I urge you to consider, what if there is more to your patients than just biochemistry and physiology? What if each life you strive to save continues beyond the death of the physical body? How would that change your practice? If you are a patient or family member, know that your intuition about the spiritual dimension of life and death is probably more accurate than the reductionist materialism that predominates in modern medicine. And if you, like me, are a staunch skeptic, someone who ridicules faith and trusts only in what can be measured and quantified, make a sincere appeal. Keep your mind open to the possibility that reality is vaster, more complex, and more wonderful than our scientific instruments can detect. We don't need to abandon reason to embrace the transcendent. In fact, fully developed reason inevitably leads us to recognize the limits of materialism and the need for a more comprehensive understanding of existence. As for me, I continue my daily work as a cardiologist, now with an expanded mission, not only to repair physical hearts, but also to help prepare spiritual hearts for their eternal journey. And every time I enter the operating room, I remember that we are not alone there. There is much more happening around the operating table than conventional medicine recognizes. I now see clearly what has been before me throughout my career. The indisputable evidence of a reality beyond matter. As Pascal said, the heart has reasons that reason itself does not know. As a cardiologist, I should have understood this long ago. My life changed completely after that experience. I began to notice patterns in the spiritual manifestations I observed in the hospital. The dark creatures did not appear randomly. They were attracted to certain attitudes and emotional states in patients: persistent hatred, bitterness, stubborn refusal to forgive, excessive materialistic attachment. All of these states seemed to emit a kind of frequency that the evil entities detected. On the other hand, patients who demonstrated humility, gratitude, and love, even in the midst of intense physical suffering, seemed to repel these creatures and attract beings of light. I also realized that my own inner state affected my capacity for spiritual perception. When I was overcome by stress, irritability, or professional pride, my spiritual vision became clouded. When I maintained a state of inner calm and compassion, I could see with extraordinary clarity. I began to incorporate meditation and prayer practices into my daily routine. Before each surgery, I would retreat for a moment of silence, asking for clarity, vision, and wisdom. This practice radically transformed my surgical effectiveness. I could literally see heart problems that the most sophisticated exams could not detect. On one memorable occasion, I was about to begin coronary artery bypass grafting when I saw a golden light pulsing in an area of the heart that tests indicated was healthy. Following my intuition, I explored that area and discovered a lesion that was about to cause a massive heart attack. The patient later told me that he had dreamed of a doctor surrounded